The metal corridor creaked with every step, a symphony of aged steel that had become the soundtrack to life aboard Andorra 9. Raynor Cole wiped grease from his hands onto an already stained cloth, glancing up at the flickering lights overhead. 10 years in operation, and the station had received precisely 0 aesthetic upgrades. Just the bare minimum to keep the oxygen flowing and the walls from collapsing into the void. "Laura, diagnostics on Section 5 air purifiers," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty passageway. Running diagnostics came the smooth, almost melodic voice of the station's AI system. "And may I add, Engineer Cole, your caffeine levels seem suboptimal this morning. Would you like me to activate the coffee machine in the mess hall?" Raynor snorted. "And risk drinking that engine oil it calls coffee? I'll pass." He rounded the corner, tools jangling in his belt, when the sight before him caused him to stop abruptly. A tall figure was effortlessly carrying what appeared to be a massive metal container, one that would typically require 2 humans and an anti-grav sled to transport. The being's skin was a deep blue, with subtle luminescent patterns that pulsed gently across exposed arms. Long silver blue hair was pulled back in a tight, practical braid that reached well past shoulder level. In his moment of distraction, Raynor's primary wrench slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the metal floor. The blue-skinned figure turned, revealing striking features: high cheekbones, eyes with a slight iridescent quality, and the characteristic facial markings of the Terrier species. Her gaze flicked from Raynor to the fallen tool and back again, a barely perceptible furrow appearing between her brows, as if she couldn't quite comprehend the clumsiness she was witnessing. "Sorry," Raynor offered with an apologetic smile, bending to retrieve the wrench. "Heavy load you've got there." The Terrian woman simply adjusted her grip on the container. "It's not heavy," she stated flatly, before continuing on her way without another word. "Good talk," Raynor muttered as he watched her disappear around the bend. That was Security Officer Muriel. Laura's voice informed him from a nearby terminal. Newly assigned from the Terrian High Command. Duty, surveillance, and security monitoring. Threat assessment capabilities, extremely high. Didn't ask, Laura. You were staring for approximately 12 seconds, Engineer Cole. My protocols suggest this indicates interest requiring informational context. Raynor rolled his eyes. Your protocols need an update. Speaking of updates, came another voice, this one belonging to his colleague, Engineer Arya Novak, who approached from the direction of the operations center. Please tell me you're not already making eyes at the Terrian officer. I wasn't making eyes, Raynor protested. I was professionally observing a colleague's impressive strength. Arya leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Right, just like you were professionally observing the Centaurian ambassador's daughter last month. I swore I'd transfer if I had to witness another one of your failed romantic endeavors. Yet here you are, Raynor grinned, gesturing broadly with his wrench. Only because no other station would take me after that incident with the quantum stabilizer. Arya pushed off from the wall. Anyway, the main lab's pressure sensors are acting up again. Michaels is worried we might have a small explosion on our hands if we don't get fixed. Perfect. Nothing like the threat of decompression to start the day. Raynor gathered his tools with renewed purpose. Lead the way. As they walked, the lights overhead continued their sporadic flickering, an issue that had persisted for months but remained perpetually at the bottom of the repair priority list. Some newer crew members had started rumors of ghostly presences aboard the station, but the truth was far less supernatural. Just outdated circuitry and perpetually delayed maintenance schedules. So, Arya ventured. What's the deal with the coffee machine this time? It's developing sentience, Raynor replied seriously. And it's angry. Yesterday, it gave Kowalski something that looked like motor oil but smelled like burning plastic. Again? That's the 3rd time this month. I'm telling you, it's rebelling. Next, the food processors will rise up and we'll have a full-scale appliance revolution on our hands. Their banter continued as they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of Andorra 9. The station had originally been constructed for mineral research on the orbit of a barren planet at the edge of the galaxy. Now it served primarily as a waypoint for interplanetary explorers and the occasional diplomat, a far cry from its initial scientific purpose. In the main lab, several researchers were huddled around a console, nervous expressions on their faces as they monitored rapidly. Fluctuating pressure readings. "Ah, the miracle worker arrives," called out Chief Scientist Michaels, relief evident in his voice. "Cole, this thing's been going haywire for the past hour. The backup systems are holding, but if the primary seal gives, everyone dies horribly in the cold vacuum of space." Rayner suggested cheerfully as he set down his toolkit. "Let's avoid that particular scenario, shall we?" He had just begun examining the system when alarms suddenly blared throughout the section. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an ominous glow. "Warning, critical pressure anomaly detected in main laboratory," Laura's voice announced, all traces of its earlier conversational tone replaced by urgent efficiency. "Backup systems compromised. Emergency protocols initiated." "That's not supposed to happen," Rayner muttered, fingers flying over the diagnostic panel. The laboratory doors slid open, and there stood Muriel, the Terrian security officer, her posture alert and ready. Without hesitation, she strode directly to the power coupling station. "The energy cell is overloading," she stated with absolute certainty, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "It needs to be removed immediately." Rayner glanced at the readings and nodded quickly. "You're right, but the safety mechanism is jammed. We can't release it remotely." Muriel didn't hesitate. "I can extract it manually." "Wait, you'll need insulated," Rayner began, but the Terrian was already moving. With astonishing speed and precision, Muriel reached into the housing unit, her hands protected only by the natural resilience of Terrian skin. She gripped the overheating power cell and, with a single powerful movement, wrenched it free from its mounting. "Emergency bypass routing required," she announced, holding the dangerous component at arm's length. "The circuit will overload without immediate intervention." Rayner was already in motion, sliding beneath the console and pulling out a tangle of wires. "I'm on it. Just hold that thing steady for 15 more seconds." As the scientists backed away in alarm, Rayner worked with frantic precision, rerouting power through a manual bypass he'd once installed just in case. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't regulation, but as sparks flew around his hands and the emergency lights continued to pulse, it was their only chance. "Done," he called out, making the final connection. The alarms abruptly ceased, and the normal lighting gradually returned. Muriel placed the now cooling power cell into a containment unit, her expression neutral despite having just held what amounted to a small bomb in her bare hands. The room erupted in relieved chatter as the scientists checked systems and confirmed the danger had passed. Rayner pulled himself out from under the console, his face smudged with grease, and approached the Terrian officer. "Nice work," he said, offering his hand in the human tradition of a handshake. "That was some quick thinking, and apparently Terrian skin is a lot tougher than I realized." Muriel looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before briefly accepting it. Her touch was warmer than he expected. "You created an effective bypass," she acknowledged, her tone factual rather than complimentary. "Unorthodox, but functional." "That's pretty much my job description," Rayner smiled. "Unorthodox, but functional. The official miracle worker of dying equipment." Something flickered across Muriel's expression, perhaps curiosity, perhaps confusion at his casual manner. "Your interventions saved lives," she stated. "That is significant." Before Rayner could respond, Muriel turned and departed the lab with the same efficient purpose with which she had arrived, leaving him standing there with an unusual feeling of accomplishment. Well, Arya sidled up beside him, a knowing smirk on her face. That was almost a full conversation. "You're making progress." "Shut up," Rayner muttered, but there was no heat in it. Something about the Terrian officer intrigued him beyond her obvious physical capabilities or exotic appearance. There had been a moment, brief but unmistakable, when something real had passed between them. "Laura," he called out as he began gathering his tools. "Yes, Engineer Cole." What can you tell me about Tarian culture? Just, for professional interaction purposes. Of course, Engineer Cole, the AI responded, and Rayner could have sworn there was amusement in its synthesized voice. For purely professional purposes. Initiating cultural briefing now. 3 days after the laboratory incident, Rayner found himself in the station's mess hall, pushing what the food processor optimistically labeled as protein porridge around his tray. The substance was gray, with the consistency of wet cement and approximately the same flavor profile. Mind if I join you? Arya asked, already setting her tray down across from him. Please do. I need someone to confirm this isn't actually construction material. Arya poked dubiously at her own portion. I think they're using the same recipe for this, and for patching hull breaches. Rayner was about to respond when he spotted Muriel entering the mess hall. As always, she moved with purpose, selecting a nutritional supplement packet, standard Tarian fare, rather than braving the station's questionable cuisine. Without really thinking about it, he raised a hand and called out, "Hey, Officer Muriel, there's space here if you want to join us." Arya kicked him under the table. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Several heads turned, including Muriel's. The Tarian looked momentarily taken aback by the casual invitation, but after a brief hesitation, she approached their table. "Engineer Cole," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Engineer Novak." "Just Rayner is fine," he said, gesturing to the empty seat. "And this is Arya. We don't stand on ceremony much around here." Muriel sat down with precise movements, placing her supplement packet and a container of water on the table. "Your station's informality is notable. That's one word for it," Arya muttered. "So," Rayner began, pushing his untouched porridge aside, "how are you finding Endora 9 so far?" "Not exactly the galactic hub of excitement, I know." Muriel carefully opened her supplement. "It serves its purpose. My assignment is security monitoring, not entertainment evaluation." "Right, of course. Still, you must have observations." "Heart rate increased by 12.7% during your conversation with Officer Muriel. Would you like me to run a diagnostic on potential causes?" "No, Laura, I would not," Rayner replied firmly. "Very well. For reference, common causes of such physiological responses include stress, excitement, and romantic interest. Just for your information." Arya burst into laughter as Rayner groaned and dropped his head into his hands. "I swear, one day I'm going to reprogram that AI." "Good luck with that," Arya said, still chuckling. "And even better luck with Officer Ice Queen. Just a friendly warning, don't get tangled up in interplanetary complications. Especially not with a Tarian whose superior officer is about to conduct an evaluation." "Who said anything about getting tangled up?" Rayner protested, though even to his own ears, the denial sounded hollow. 2 weeks later, Endora 9 was buzzing with unusual activity. A delegation from Proxima B had arrived to negotiate a trade agreement, transforming the typically quiet station into a hub of diplomatic frenzy. The addition of 12 diplomats and their staff had stretched the station's accommodations to their limits, and Rayner found himself working overtime to ensure all systems functioned properly for their important guests. He was in the midst of calibrating the environmental controls in the conference room when Muriel entered, her uniform more formal than usual, likely in preparation for the diplomatic proceedings. "Engineer Cole," she acknowledged. "Are the preparations complete?" "Almost there," he replied, adjusting a final setting. "Just making sure our esteemed guests don't freeze or suffocate during negotiations. Standard hospitality stuff." Muriel moved to stand beside him, reviewing the control panel with practiced efficiency. "The Proximan representative is particularly sensitive to environmental fluctuations. Your attention to detail is appropriate." Rayner grinned. "Was that almost a compliment, Officer Muriel?" "It was a factual observation," she replied, though there seemed to be less edge to her tone than usual. Over the past weeks, their interactions had developed a certain rhythm. His casual humor met with her precise responses, yet the sharpness that had characterized their early exchanges had gradually softened. "Well, I'll take what I can get," he said, closing the access panel. "You seem extra formal today. Is it just the diplomats? Or is it because your sergeant is arriving tomorrow?" Muriel's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Sergeant Zarin expects exemplary standards at all times. His arrival merely provides the opportunity to demonstrate that those standards are being maintained. Sounds intense. Is he really as strict as everyone says? He is. Muriel paused, seeming to search for the right words. Traditional, even by Tarian standards. He believes that our kind should minimize integration with other species to preserve our cultural integrity. Rayner frowned. That seems a little counterproductive for a galaxy full of different species all trying to get along. It is an ongoing debate among our people, Muriel admitted, surprising Rayner with this glimpse into Tarian internal politics. Some argue that selective adaptation strengthens us, while others, like Zarin, fear it will dilute what makes us Tarian. And where do you stand on that debate? Rayner asked, genuinely curious. Muriel met his gaze directly, her iridescent eyes unreadable. I follow my orders and perform my duties. My personal opinions are irrelevant to my assignment. They're not irrelevant to me, Rayner said quietly. Something flickered across Muriel's expression, surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. But before she could respond, the station's comms system crackled to life. Security alert in Cargo Bay 3, Laura announced, all business. Inventory discrepancy detected. Security personnel requested. Muriel immediately straightened, professional mask firmly back in place. I must go. Please ensure the conference room is fully prepared within the hour. She left without another word, leaving Rayner staring after her, wondering about the moment that had almost happened between them. The discovery of missing cargo, specifically a container of specialized communication equipment that had been destined for the Proximan delegation, threw the diplomatic proceedings into chaos. Accusations flew rapidly, with several members of the delegation openly suggesting that Tarian involvement seemed likely, given their known military interests in the sector. Rayner found himself in the operations center, where a heated exchange was taking place between the Proximan ambassador and Commander Lin, the station's human administrator. I find it highly suspicious, the ambassador was saying, his translucent skin flushing deep purple with anger, that items vanish precisely when a Tarian officer is assigned to security. Their interest in our communication technology is, well, documented. Muriel stood at attention near the wall, her expression completely neutral despite the accusation being hurled in her direction. Ambassador Thrix, Commander Lin replied placatingly. I assure you, Officer Muriel has our complete confidence. She is, in fact, leading the investigation into the missing equipment. How convenient, the ambassador scoffed. The predator investigating the disappearance of the prey. Rayner, who had been quietly monitoring the environmental systems from a side console, found himself unable to remain silent. With all due respect, Ambassador, he interjected, stepping forward, that accusation is completely unfounded. Officer Muriel has demonstrated nothing but professionalism since her arrival. If anything, security has improved under her watch. All eyes turned to him, some surprised, some annoyed at the interruption from a mere engineer. Muriel's gaze, in particular, held a question, as if she couldn't quite understand why he would speak up on her behalf. Commander Lin cleared her throat. Engineer Cole, while your input is unexpected, he does raise a valid point. We have no evidence linking Officer Muriel to the missing equipment. Evidence can be manufactured or concealed, the ambassador insisted. I demand that a neutral third party review the security logs. I can do that, Rayner offered immediately. I have system-wide access for maintenance purposes, and I'm neither Tarian nor Proximan. Lin looked skeptical. Engineer Cole, this is a security matter, not a maintenance issue. Actually, it could be both, Rayner pressed. If someone tampered with the cargo bay doors or the inventory tracking system, there might be evidence in the maintenance logs that wouldn't appear in standard security reviews. After a moment's consideration, Lin nodded. Very well. Ambassador Thrix, would this arrangement satisfy your concerns for neutrality? The ambassador didn't look pleased, but grudgingly agreed. For now, but I expect results quickly. Our delegation cannot proceed with negotiations while under the cloud of these suspicions. As the meeting dispersed, Raynor found himself alone in the corridor with Muriel, who had followed him out. "Why did you do that?" she asked without preamble. "Do what?" "Offer to help investigate." "Defend me," she clarified, her tone conveying genuine puzzlement. "You have no obligation to involve yourself in security matters or diplomatic disputes." Raynor ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling awkward under her intense gaze. Because it wasn't right, what they were implying. "You've done nothing to deserve that kind of suspicion." "You cannot know that with certainty," she pointed out. "You have known me for less than a month. Your defense was based on insufficient data." "Maybe I'm going with my gut," he smiled slightly. "Humans do that sometimes. Call it instinct or intuition." "Intuition is not evidence," Muriel stated, but her tone lacked its usual dismissiveness. "No, but sometimes it's all we have to go on," Raynor replied. "Anyway, I should get started on those system logs if we want to clear this up before your sergeant arrives tomorrow." Muriel nodded, but as Raynor turned to leave, she spoke again. "Engineer Cole, Raynor." He paused, surprised by her use of his first name. "Yes. Thank you," she said simply, the words clearly unfamiliar on her tongue. Something warm unfurled in Raynor's chest. "You're welcome, Muriel." It took several hours of painstaking review, but Raynor eventually discovered an anomaly in the cargo bay access logs, a phantom entry point where someone had bypassed the standard security protocols using a specialized override that wasn't part of the station's official systems. The intrusion was sophisticated enough that it might have gone unnoticed in a standard security sweep, but it left traces in the power distribution network that Raynor's maintenance access allowed him to detect. Late that night, he sought out Muriel to share his findings, eventually locating her in the observation deck, a rarely used section of the station that offered a panoramic view of the barren planet below and the star-studded void beyond. She stood alone, gazing outward, her profile etched against the star's cape. "There you are," Raynor said, stepping onto the deck. "I've been looking all over." Muriel turned, surprise momentarily visible on her features before she composed herself. "Engineer Cole, have you found something in the logs?" "I have, actually." He moved to stand beside her at the viewport. "Someone used a non-standard override to access the cargo bay during third shift yesterday. It wasn't through any of our systems, which means it was probably external tech smuggled aboard. I've isolated the signature, and it matches known patterns used by the Orion Syndicate." "The Orion Syndicate," Muriel repeated, her expression hardening. "They're known arms dealers operating throughout this sector." "Exactly. Which means this probably isn't about diplomatic sabotage at all. It's straightforward theft. They're likely planning to sell the tech on the black market." "This is valuable information," Muriel acknowledged. "Have you informed Commander Lin?" "I sent her a preliminary report, but I wanted to show you the details first, since you're heading the investigation." He handed her a data pad with his findings. "There's more. I think I can trace where the stolen equipment might be now. They're probably keeping it somewhere on the station until they can smuggle it off." Muriel reviewed the data with quick efficiency. "This is thorough work, Raynor. You would make a capable security analyst." He grinned. "I'll take that as high praise coming from you. But I'm happy being the guy who keeps the lights on and the air flowing." After completing her review, Muriel set the data pad aside and turned her gaze back to the stars. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence. The vastness of space spread before them. "May I ask you something?" Raynor ventured finally. "You may ask," she replied, which he had learned was neither a promise to answer nor a refusal. "Earlier, you mentioned debates among Terrians about cultural integrity versus adaptation. It made me curious about your history. Why is maintaining emotional discipline so important to your people?" Muriel was quiet for so long that Raynor thought she might have decided not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Many centuries ago, before we achieved space travel, the Terrian homeworld was divided into warring factions. The conflict were driven primarily by emotional leaders who roused their followers with promises of glory and vengeance. Millions died in wars fueled by pride and hatred." She turned slightly toward him, the starlight reflecting in her eyes. "When at last a unified government emerged, our ancestors made a conscious choice to elevate reason above emotion. particularly in matters of warfare and governance. They believed that only by mastering our feelings could we master our destiny. That makes sense, historically, Rayner acknowledged. But carrying that principle into personal relationships seems, I don't know, like throwing out something valuable along with something dangerous. Perhaps, Muriel conceded, surprising him. But traditions that endure for generations develop a gravity of their own. To question them is to risk being pulled back into orbit or flung into the void. The metaphor, so unlike her usual direct speech, struck Rayner as oddly poetic. Is that what you're afraid of? Being flung into the void? Muriel's gaze returned to the stars. I'm not afraid, Rayner. I am considering trajectories. Before he could ask what she meant by that enigmatic statement, the observation deck door slid open, and Arya appeared, looking harried. There you are, she exclaimed. Commander Lin's called an emergency meeting. The Proximate ambassador is threatening to leave the station without signing any agreements unless the equipment is recovered immediately. The moment broken, Muriel straightened professional mask back in place. We should go. The data engineer Cole has gathered may help resolve this situation. As they left the observation deck, Rayner felt as though something significant had almost happened. A connection almost made, a boundary almost crossed. But like many things aboard Endora 9, it remained in the realm of almost, at least for now. The following morning brought the arrival of Sergeant Zarin's vessel, a sleek Tarian cruiser that dwarfed the station's regular shuttlecraft. Its presence created a tangible shift in the station's atmosphere, an added tension that radiated outward from the docking bay where Zarin would make his entrance. Rayner, having been up most of the night helping security pinpoint potential hiding places for the stolen equipment, was running on caffeine and determination as he made his way to the main control room. Commander Lin had requested his presence due to his role in identifying the security breach, though he suspected Muriel might not be thrilled about his involvement in what was now officially a Tarian security matter. His suspicion was confirmed when he entered the control room to find Muriel in conversation with a tall, imposing Tarian male whose uniform displayed significantly more decoration than hers. Sergeant Zarin, undoubtedly. The elder Tarian's blue skin was a shade darker than Muriel's, marked with more pronounced luminescent patterns that Rayner recognized as indicators of age and rank among their people. When they noticed his entry, Muriel's expression remained neutral, but Rayner could read the tension in her posture. Engineer Cole, she acknowledged formally. Sergeant Zarin, this is the maintenance engineer who discovered the security breach pattern. Zarin turned, his gaze sharp and evaluating. Hey, maintenance engineer? Not security personnel? Yes, sir, Rayner replied, straightening instinctively under that penetrating stare. I have system-wide access for infrastructure maintenance, which sometimes reveals patterns that standard security protocols might miss. Interesting, Zarin said, in a tone that suggested he found it anything but. And what is your involvement in this investigation now, Engineer Cole? Before Rayner could answer, Commander Lin entered the control room, nodding respectfully to the Tarian officer. Sergeant Zarin, welcome to Endora 9. I see you've met Engineer Cole, who has been instrumental in our investigation. So, I'm told, Zarin replied coolly. Though I find it unusual that a human engineer would be so deeply involved in what is clearly a security matter, one that potentially involves Tarian interests. Lin's expression remained diplomatically neutral. Engineer Cole's assistance has been invaluable. Thanks to his discovery, we've narrowed down the likely location of the stolen equipment to the lower storage sections. Officer Muriel is preparing a recovery operation as we speak. Zarin turned to Muriel. Is this true, officer? You're allowing station personnel to direct your security operations. No, Sergeant, Muriel responded crisply. I have developed the tactical approach myself, utilizing Engineer Cole's technical findings as intelligence, not direction. I see. Zarin's tone made it clear he was not entirely satisfied with this explanation. And what are the broader security concerns? The weapons trafficking reports that prompted your assignment here. My investigation is ongoing, Muriel replied. The current incident may be connected to those concerns. The Orion Syndicate has known links to weapons distribution networks. Very well, Zarin nodded. I will observe your operation to recover this equipment. It will form part of my evaluation of your performance here. As if that statement hadn't just significantly raised the stakes for Muriel, Zarin turned to Commander Lin. I will require a complete briefing on all security procedures implemented since Officer Muriel's arrival, as well as any incidents that have occurred during this period. Of course, Sergeant, Lin agreed. We can discuss this in my office while Officer Muriel prepares the recovery operation. As they left, Raynor approached Muriel, keeping his voice low. So that's the infamous Zarin. Charming fellow. He is a respected superior officer, Muriel replied automatically, though there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. And now he's evaluating your work based on how you handle the situation. No pressure. Pressure is irrelevant. Performance is what matters. She gathered several data pads, her movements precise, but with an underlying tension that Raynor hadn't observed before. I must prepare the tactical approach. Let me help, he offered. I know those lower storage sections better than anyone on this station. There are maintenance shafts and junction points that don't appear on standard maps. Muriel hesitated, clearly torn between practical need and the risk of appearing too reliant on a human engineer in front of her superior. Look, Raynor pressed. I can provide the information and then stay completely out of the way. Zarin doesn't even have to know I was involved beyond what he's already been told. After a moment's consideration, Muriel nodded once. Very well, but only technical consultation. The operation itself will be conducted by security personnel only. Understood, Raynor agreed, relief washing over him. So what's your initial plan? As they bent over the station schematics, Raynor couldn't help but notice that the easy rhythm they had begun to develop over the past weeks had been replaced by a formal stiffness in Muriel's demeanor. Zarin's arrival had clearly affected her, reinforcing the barriers that Raynor had thought were starting to lower between them. The next few hours were a flurry of activity as they developed a strategy to locate and recover the stolen equipment. Raynor provided detailed information about the maintenance access points that could be used to approach the suspected storage location undetected, while Muriel integrated this into a comprehensive tactical plan. Throughout their work, Raynor caught glimpses of the Muriel he had come to know. The sharp intelligence, the precise thinking, the subtle adaptability that belied her apparently rigid exterior. But now these qualities were overshadowed by an almost palpable pressure to perform perfectly under Zarin's evaluating gaze. When the plan was complete, Muriel prepared to brief her security team. Before she left, Raynor caught her arm gently. Hey, he said quietly, you've got this. Your plan is solid. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back to his face, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your technical assistance, engineer. Cole. The formality stung after the connection they had begun to forge, but Raynor understood the reasons behind it. Anytime, Officer Muriel. Good luck out there. She nodded once, then left to gather her team, her posture straight and professional. Every inch the Tarian officer Zarin expected her to be. Left alone in the planning room, Raynor found himself staring at the schematics they'd been reviewing, a strange hollowness forming in his chest. Something had shifted between them, or rather, something had been pushed back into rigid alignment by Zarin's arrival. The recovery operation was set to begin in 1 hour. Raynor knew he should get some rest, having been awake for nearly 24 hours, but his mind wouldn't settle. Instead, he made his way to the engineering bay where Arya was running diagnostics on a set of environmental filters. You look terrible, she observed without looking up from her work. Thanks. Always good for the ego. He dropped into a chair beside her station, spinning it absently. Sergeant Zarin arrived. The fearsome Tarian taskmaster. How's that going? About as well as you'd expect. Muriel's gone full robot mode, like she's afraid to show even a hint of personality. Arya paused her work, giving Raynor her full attention. You're genuinely worried about her, aren't you? This isn't just another one of your interspecies flirtations. Raynor stopped spinning the chair. No, it's not, he admitted quietly. There's something about her, Arya. When she lets her guard down, even for a moment, there's this depth. Intelligence, yes, but also this subtle complexity that goes against everything I've heard about Tarians being emotionless drones. And now you're afraid Zarin is going to erase whatever progress you've made in getting to know the real her. Something like that. He ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was troubled. I just don't understand why she has to prove herself to him. She's already exceptional at her job. For what I understand about Tarian culture, it's not just about competence, Arya said, surprising Raynor with her insight. It's about purity of purpose. Zarin probably isn't just evaluating her performance. He's making sure she hasn't been contaminated by too much human interaction. Contaminated? Raynor echoed, the word leaving a bitter taste. Is that how they see it? Some of them, apparently. Arya's expression softened. Look, I know you care about her, but maybe this isn't the right time to push. Let her handle Zarin her way. When he's gone, things might go back to normal, or whatever passes for normal between you two. Raynor nodded reluctantly. Yeah, you're probably right. Attention all personnel, Laura's voice interrupted, broadcasting station-wide. Security operation in progress. Lower storage sections are now restricted. Please remain in your current locations until further notice. It started, Raynor murmured, a knot of tension forming in his stomach. I should have been there. No, you shouldn't, Arya countered firmly. This is her show, not yours. The best thing you could do right now is stay out of the way and let her do her job. Though he knew she was right, it didn't make the waiting any easier. 2 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Raynor tried to occupy himself with routine maintenance tasks, but his thoughts kept returning to Muriel and the operation. Had they found the equipment? Was she impressing Zarin with her tactical prowess? Or had something gone wrong? When Laura finally announced the end of the security lockdown, Raynor practically sprinted to the operations center, desperate for news. What he found there stopped him in his tracks. Commander Lin was engaged in heated conversation with Ambassador Thrix. Sergeant Zarin stood rigidly to one side, his expression thunderous even by Tarian standards. And Muriel stood at attention, her face a perfect mask of Tarian control, but Raynor could see the subtle tension in her posture that spoke of something gone very wrong. The equipment was not there, Lin was explaining to the ambassador. We searched all possible locations based on our intelligence. Convenient, the ambassador sneered. Perhaps it was never missing at all. Perhaps this was merely a ploy to delay our negotiations while you seek better terms. Ambassador, I assure you, your assurances mean nothing. First, you suggest Tarian involvement. Then you claim it was these Orion criminals. And now you cannot find the equipment at all? This is either incompetence or deliberate deception, neither of which inspires confidence in these trade discussions. Raynor stepped forward, unable to remain silent. Commander, if I may, all eyes turned to him, including Muriel's, whose gaze held a warning he chose to ignore. The equipment could have been moved during our planning phase, he suggested. If they detected our system searches, they might have relocated. Everything. Engineer Cole, Zarin's deep voice cut through the room. This is a security matter being handled by qualified personnel. Your speculation is neither required nor helpful. With respect, Sergeant, Raynor replied, struggling to keep his tone even. I found the breach pattern in the first place. I know the system signatures we're looking for. And yet the operation failed, Zarin observed coldly. Perhaps your information was flawed from the beginning. Before Raynor could respond, the operation center door slid open to admit Arya, who looked unusually agitated. Commander Lin, she called, striding forward. We've got a problem in Docking Bay 3. The environmental system just went into unexplained lockdown, and there's a shuttle requesting emergency departure clearance. Lin frowned. What shuttle? We don't have any scheduled departures. It's registered to one of the Proximan delegation's assistants, Arya reported. But the strange thing is the request was inputted manually from the bay controls, not from inside the shuttle. The equipment, Muriel stated, speaking for the first time since Raynor had entered. They're moving it now. Without waiting for orders, she was already heading for the door, her movement purposeful and swift. Zarin followed immediately, barking commands into his communicator to deploy Tarian security forces. Wait, Lin called. We need a coordinated response. But the Tarians were already gone, leaving chaos in their wake. The ambassador began protesting loudly about accusations against his people, while Lin attempted to maintain diplomatic calm, while clearly wanting to join the security response. Raynor exchanged a quick glance with Arya. "The maintenance shaft?" he said urgently. "We can cut them off at Junction 7. She nodded, and they slipped out of the operations center while Lin was still trying to placate the ambassador. The route through the maintenance tunnels was cramped and rarely used, but offered a direct path to the docking bay that bypassed the main corridors. As they hurried through the narrow passages, Raynor's mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind this? Was it really someone from the Proximan delegation? Or was that just another false trail? They emerged into a service alcove overlooking Docking Bay 3, just as chaos erupted below. A group of figures, most definitely not Proximans, based on their distinctly humanoid builds, were engaged in a firefight with Tarian security forces. Zarin was directing the response from a position of cover, while Muriel had advanced to flank the attackers. "Those are Orion Syndicate markings," Arya whispered, pointing to insignias visible on the attackers' uniforms. "And there's the shuttle," Raynor noted, indicating a small vessel position for immediate departure. They must have been disguised as part of the Proximan group. The firefight intensified as the Syndicate members realized they were cornered. They retreated toward the shuttle, laying down covering fire as they went. Muriel, seeing their strategy, moved to cut off their escape route, her movements fluid and precise as she dodged enemy fire. "She's going to get herself killed," Raynor muttered, eyes fixed on her advancing form. "What can we do from up here?" Arya asked. "We're not armed, and that's a full-scale battle down there." Raynor's gaze darted around the bay, his engineer's mind rapidly analyzing the situation. "The bay door controls," he said suddenly. "We can override them from that auxiliary panel. If we seal the doors, they can't launch." Without waiting for Arya's response, he darted across the service walkway to the control panel she had indicated. His fingers flew over the interface, bypassing standard protocols to access the emergency override. Come on, he muttered, as the system resisted his attempts. Below, the Syndicate members had reached the shuttle and were preparing for launch, while Muriel and the other Tarian officers continued their assault, trying to disable the vessel. Just as the shuttle's engines began to power up, Raynor managed to activate the emergency lockdown. Massive Durasteel doors began to slide across the bay opening, preventing any possible escape. The Syndicate members, realizing they were trapped, redoubled their defensive fire. One of them produced a small, angular device from a container, undoubtedly the missing Proximan equipment, and began frantically manipulating its controls. "I think that's some kind of communications jammer," Arya observed, having joined Raynor at the panel. "If they activate it, they could disable our systems long enough to override the bay doors." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Raynor growled, fingers dancing across the control panel as he enacted a series of rapid security protocols that would isolate the bay's systems from external interference. Below, the battle had reached a critical point. Several Syndicate members had been incapacitated by Tarian fire, but the remainder had established a defensive position inside the shuttle's loading ramp. Muriel, seeing the operative with the Proximan device, launched herself forward in a daring assault. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The operative raised the device, which now emitted a pulsing blue light. Muriel fired her weapon with unerring accuracy, striking his arm. The device tumbled from his grasp, and then exploded in a burst of blinding energy that engulfed both Muriel and the nearest Syndicate members. "No!" Raynor shouted, helpless to intervene from his position above. When the energy pulse dissipated, the scene below was one of chaos. Several figures lay motionless, including Muriel, while the remaining Syndicate members threw down their weapons in surrender, recognizing their plan had failed. Raynor didn't remember running. He was simply there, in the docking bay, pushing past Tarian officers to reach Muriel's still form. Zarin was already kneeling beside her, his expression grave as he checked her life signs. "Is she?" Raynor couldn't finish the question, fear choking the words in his throat. She lives, Zarin stated, his tone clinical. The blast was non-lethal, a pulse designed to disrupt electronics, not to kill. But it has affected her neural patterns. She requires immediate medical attention. As if summoned by his words, the station's medical team arrived, quickly transferring Muriel to a stretcher. Raynor moved to follow, but Zarin's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Your interference nearly cost Officer Muriel her life today, the sergeant said, his voice low and dangerous. Had you not involved yourself in matters beyond your jurisdiction, she would have developed a proper tactical approach rather than rushing to prevent your amateur efforts from causing further damage. That's not true, Raynor protested, trying to pull free. I helped seal the bay doors. I prevented their escape. You created chaos where there should have been order, Zarin countered. This is why Terrians maintain distance from emotional species. Your impulsive actions disrupt careful planning. Before Raynor could respond, Commander Lin intervened, her expression stern. Sergeant Zarin, Engineer Cole's actions, while unorthodox, helped secure the stolen equipment and capture the perpetrators. I suggest we focus on the successful outcome rather than assigning blame. Zarin released Raynor's arm with barely concealed contempt. I will be filing a full report with Terria High Command, recommending Officer Muriel's immediate transfer back to our homeworld. She has clearly been compromised by her time here. With that, he strode away, following the medical team that carried Muriel. Raynor moved to go after them, but Lin placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. Give it time, Cole, she advised quietly. Let the medical team do their work and let Zarin cool down. This isn't over yet. But as Raynor watched Muriel being carried away, he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps it was, that whatever connection had been growing between them would be severed by Zarin's intervention, and she would return to her world without another word. Hours later, Raynor sat alone in the observation deck, staring out at the endless void of space without really seeing it. The medical report had confirmed that Muriel would recover fully. The neural disruption was temporary, and she was already regaining consciousness. But Zarin had barred any non-Terrian visitors, effectively isolating her from the rest of the station crew. The door slid open behind him, but Raynor didn't turn, assuming it was Arya coming to check on him again. If you brought more of that synthesized coffee, I don't want it, he said tiredly. I'm pretty sure it's more toxic than helpful at this point. I have not brought coffee, came a familiar, precise voice that definitely did not belong to Arya. Raynor spun around, startled to find Muriel standing in the doorway. She looked paler than usual, the luminescent patterns on her skin dimmer, but she was upright and alert. Muriel, he breathed, rising to his feet. Should you be out of medical? Zarin said. Sergeant Zarin has returned to his vessel to prepare for departure, she interrupted, stepping fully into the room. He has completed his evaluation. And Raynor asked, afraid to hear the answer. Muriel moved to stand beside him at the viewport, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond. He has recommended my immediate transfer back to Terria Prime for reconditioning. The word sent a chill through Raynor. Reconditioning? What does that mean? It is a process designed to reinforce Terrian principles in officers who have shown signs of deviation. Her voice remained neutral, but Raynor could detect a subtle tension in it. It is not painful, but it is thorough. And you just going to accept that? Let them rewire your brain, because you showed a hint of independent thought. Muriel turned to face him fully, her iridescent eyes searching his face. Is that what you believe I have done here? Shown independent thought? I think you've shown that you're more than just a perfect Terrian drone, Raynor said earnestly. You've adapted to this station, worked with humans and other species, made decisions based on the situation rather than rigid protocol. And despite what Zarin thinks, that's made you more effective, not less. Perhaps, she conceded, surprising him. But there is another factor Zarin considers more concerning than my tactical adaptations. What's that? Muriel hesitated, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing her features before she composed herself. My interactions with you, specifically. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Raynor swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing. "What about our interactions?" he asked, his voice low. "They have been frequent, voluntary, outside the requirements of duty." And she paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Changing in nature." Changing how? Instead of answering directly, Muriel posed a question of her own. "Why did you defend me when the ambassador made his accusations? Why did you insist on helping with the investigation? Why did you risk yourself during the confrontation in the docking bay?" The questions caught Raynor off guard, not because they were difficult to answer, but because the answers seemed so obvious to him that he hadn't considered Muriel might not understand. "Because I care about you," he said simply. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch you take the blame for something you didn't do or face danger when I might be able to help." Care. Muriel repeated the word as if testing its weight. This is the emotional attachment that Terrians are taught to avoid, the weakness that clouds judgment and compromises duty. "Is that what you believe? That caring makes you weak?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the stars. "I no longer know what I believe, Raynor Cole. On Terria, such uncertainty would be unthinkable. Here, among the stars on this station, with you, I find myself questioning principles I once held as absolute." The admission, so contrary to everything Raynor had come to expect from Terrian Reserve, left him momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, he stepped closer, deliberately entering her space. "Muriel," he said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen without analyzing or evaluating or filtering it through Terrian principles. Can you do that?" She turned to him, her expression open in a way he had never seen before. "I can try." Raynor took a deep breath, suddenly aware that he was crossing a threshold from which there would be no easy return. But the events of the day, Muriel's brush with death, Zaren's threat of reconditioning, had crystallized something in him that could no longer be denied or delayed. "I know you see emotion as weakness," he began, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "I know your culture values discipline and control above all else. But the thing is, Muriel, I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you adapt and respond and make decisions that no purely logical being would make. There's more to you than Terrian programming, whether you recognize it or not." He paused, gauging her reaction. She remained perfectly still, listening as she had promised. "The truth is," he continued, "I've developed feelings for you that go way beyond professional respect or even friendship. I like you, Muriel, more than I ever imagined possible. And maybe to you, that makes me weak or foolish or typically human. But to me, those feelings aren't a weakness. They're a strength. They make me want to be better, work harder, understand more. They make everything brighter somehow." The words hung between them, irretrievable now that they had been spoken. Raynor waited, heart pounding, for her response. Muriel stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. And then, in a reaction that would later become the stuff of station legend, she went completely silent. Not the comfortable silence of companionship they had occasionally shared, but a profound, absolute stillness that seemed to extend beyond mere absence of speech into a complete cessation of outward response. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes as Raynor waited for any sign, anger, dismissal, reciprocation, anything. But Muriel remained utterly immobile, as if his words had somehow short-circuited her carefully constructed Terrian control systems. "Muriel?" he ventured finally, concern overtaking embarrassment. "Are you okay?" When she still didn't respond, a flash of panic surged through him. Had the neural disruption from the energy pulse returned? Was she experiencing some kind of delayed reaction? "Laura," he called out, "medical emergency in the observation deck." "No." Muriel's voice cut through his alarm, the single word soft but clear. "I am functioning. I simply—" She trailed off, and for the first time since he had known her, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. "You simply what?" Raynor prompted gently. "I have no protocol for this," she admitted, a hint of something like confusion in her tone. "Terrian training does not include responses to declarations of this nature." Despite the tension of the moment, Raynor couldn't help a small smile. Are you telling me I've managed to present the perfect Tarian warrior with a situation she doesn't know how to handle? It appears so, Muriel replied, and Raynor was stunned to detect the faintest trace of wry humor in her voice. The moment was broken by the station's comms system crackling to life. "Attention all personnel," Laura announced. "Security alert in Docking Bay 2. Unauthorized access detected. Security response teams requested immediately." Muriel straightened, professionalism reasserting itself instantly. "I must go." "Of course," Raynor nodded, understanding the priorities of duty even as disappointment flooded through him. "We could talk later." She moved toward the door, but paused before exiting. "Raynor," she said, turning back to him, "I cannot provide the response you might wish for. But I do not wish to be transferred from this station." It wasn't a declaration of reciprocated feelings. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what he had said. But somehow, in that moment, it felt like enough, a small opening, a possibility that had not existed before. "Then let's make sure you don't have to leave," he replied, starting with whatever's happening in Docking Bay 2. Together, they hurried toward the new crisis, their personal matters temporarily set aside, but not forgotten. As they moved through the corridors, Raynor couldn't help but notice that Muriel walked closer to him than strictly necessary, their shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. It was a small thing, barely perceptible to anyone who didn't know her as he did. But to Raynor, it felt like the first tentative sign that the wall of Tarian reserve might not be as impenetrable as it seemed. The security alert turned out to be a final, desperate gambit by the remaining Orion Syndicate operatives. Having failed to escape with approximate technology, they had attempted to seize a different vessel, this one belonging to Sergeant Zarin himself. The Tarians, under Zarin's command, had already surrounded the docking bay when Raynor and Muriel arrived. The sergeant's expression darkened visibly at the sight of them approaching together. "Officer Muriel," he acknowledged coldly, "I did not authorize your release from medical observation." "I am fully recovered, Sergeant," she replied, standing at attention. "My duty to the station's security takes priority." "Your duty," Zarin emphasized, "is to follow Tarian command structure. I ordered you to remain under observation until our departure." Before Muriel could respond, the situation in the docking bay escalated. The syndicate members, realizing they were cornered, initiated what appeared to be a self-destruct sequence on the vessel they had attempted to commandeer. "They're going to blow the whole docking section," someone shouted. Chaos erupted as personnel scrambled to evacuate. Raynor's mind raced, analyzing the station's schematics in his head. "The emergency bulkheads," he said urgently to Muriel. "If we seal off the individual segments of the docking arm, we can contain the blast." "The control for those bulkheads are in the docking control room," she replied immediately, already turning in that direction. "Officer Muriel," Zarin's commanding voice cut through the din. "You will remain with the Tarian contingent. This is not your concern." Muriel hesitated, visibly torn between Tarian obedience and the immediate threat to the station. In that moment of hesitation, Raynor saw everything hanging in the balance. Not just the station's safety, but Muriel's future, her independence, perhaps even whatever unspoken connection had begun to form between them. "Muriel," he said quietly, using only her name, no rank, no title. "People will die if those bulkheads aren't sealed." Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw the decision form before she spoke it. "I will assist Engineer Cole with the emergency protocols," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument even as it maintained perfect Tarian respect. "It is the most efficient use of available personnel, Sergeant." Without waiting for Zarin's response, she turned and sprinted toward the control room, Raynor close at her heels. Behind them, the sergeant's angry commands were lost in the general commotion as the evacuation continued. They reached the control room just as the first warning indicators began, flashing on the displays. The syndicate sabotage had triggered a cascade failure in the vessel's power core, one that would certainly destroy a significant portion of the station if left unchecked. "The manual override sequence requires 2 operators," Muriel observed, quickly scanning the control panels. one to initiate the emergency protocol and one to confirm the individual bulkhead closures. I'll handle the main sequence, Rayner said, already inputting his access codes into the primary console. You confirm the segments as they come up. They worked in perfect synchronization, their earlier awkwardness forgotten in the face of imminent disaster. As Rayner executed the emergency protocols, Muriel confirmed each bulkhead closure, methodically sealing off sections of the docking arm to contain the impending explosion. 30 seconds to critical failure. Laura's voice announced calmly over the station's comm system. All personnel, clear docking sections immediately. Almost there, Rayner muttered, fingers flying over the controls. Just 3 more segments. Confirmed, Muriel responded, her voice steady despite the urgency of their task. Sections 7 through 9 sealing now. Final segment, Rayner called out, initiating full lockdown in 3, 2, 1. The moment the final command was entered, a dull thud reverberated through the station, followed by a more distant boom as the vessel's power core detonated. The entire station shuddered briefly, but the bulkheads held, containing the worst of the blast to the now evacuated outer sections of the docking arm. Damage report coming in, Laura announced. Explosion contained to docking bay 2. No casualties reported. Structural integrity at 97% and holding. Well done, Engineer Cole and Officer Muriel. Rayner sagged against the console, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. We did it, he breathed, looking up at Muriel with a grin that he couldn't have suppressed if he tried. That was some quick thinking. It was effective teamwork, she corrected, but there was something in her expression, a softness around the eyes, perhaps, or the slightest upward curve at the corner of her mouth, that belied her formal words. The moment was short-lived. The control room door slid open to admit Sergeant Zarin, flanked by 2 Tarian officers. His expression was thunderous. Officer Muriel, he stated, his tone clipped and formal. You directly contravene my orders in the midst of a security situation. This is unacceptable. With respect, Sergeant, she replied, standing at attention. The imminent threat to the station required immediate action. Engineer Cole and I were positioned to implement the necessary protocols most efficiently. You abandoned your post to follow a human engineer, Zarin countered, his voice low but cutting. This is precisely the kind of compromised judgment I observed in my evaluation. My recommendation stands. Immediate transfer back to Terria Prime for reconditioning. Rayner started to protest, but Muriel silenced him with a subtle gesture. Sergeant Zarin, she said, her voice clear and steady. I must respectfully request that you reconsider your evaluation. The request was so unexpected that even Zarin appeared momentarily taken aback. On what grounds? He demanded. On the grounds that my actions today, while unorthodox by Tarian standards, resulted in the optimal outcome. The stolen technology was recovered, the syndicate operatives were apprehended, and the station was saved from significant damage. If the purpose of Tarian protocol is to achieve maximum effectiveness, then surely results must be considered alongside methodology. It was the longest speech Rayner had ever heard Muriel deliver, and he held his breath as Zarin considered her words. The sergeant's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of the logic in her argument. Your results are not in question, Officer Muriel, he said finally. It is your independence that concerns me. A Tarian officer must be reliable, predictable, and above all, obedient to the command structure. If I may, Sergeant, Rayner interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Isn't adaptability also a Tarian virtue? The ability to assess a situation and determine the most efficient course of action, even if it doesn't follow standard protocol. Zarin's gaze shifted to him, cold and evaluating. You presume to lecture me on Tarian virtues, Engineer Cole. Not at all, Rayner replied, careful to keep his tone respectful rather than challenging. Believe your adaptations have made you more effective, not less. I do, Sergeant, she replied without hesitation. My understanding of human methodology has enhanced my ability to anticipate and respond to threats in this environment. After another long moment of consideration, Zarin seemed to reach a decision. I will amend my recommendation, he stated, his tone making it clear this was a significant concession. You may remain at your post on Andorra 9 for an additional evaluation period of 3 months. At that time, I will return to make a final assessment. Relief flooded through Raynor, though he was careful not to show it too openly in front of the stern Tarian sergeant. Thank you, Sergeant, Muriel acknowledged with a formal bow of her head. I will honor this opportunity. See that you do, Zarin replied. And remember, Officer Muriel, observation continues even in my absence. Maintain Tarian standards in all things. With that warning clearly delivered, he turned and left the control room, his officers following close behind. When they were alone again, Raynor let out a long breath. That was intense, but you did it. You get to stay. For now, Muriel clarified, though the rigid tension that had held her body during Zarin's presence had noticeably eased. The evaluation continues. Still, Raynor smiled. 3 months is better than immediate transfer and reconditioning. Muriel nodded, her gaze thoughtful. Yes, it provides time for consideration. Consideration of what? Raynor asked, though something in her tone gave him a flicker of hope about the answer. Instead of responding directly, Muriel moved toward the door. The station requires damage assessment. We should rejoin the response teams. Raynor nodded, accepting the deflection for what it was. Not a rejection, but a postponement. There would be time for personal matters later. For now, duty called them both. The following days were consumed with repairs and security investigations. The Proximan delegation, having had their equipment recovered and the true culprits identified, resumed trade negotiations with renewed goodwill. The Orion Syndicate members were transferred to a Federation detention facility, and gradually, life aboard Andorra 9 began to return to its version of normal. Throughout this period, Raynor and Muriel worked together frequently, their collaborative efficiency now recognized and utilized by Commander Lin. Their interactions remained professional, but Raynor couldn't help noticing subtle changes in Muriel's demeanor, a willingness to consider his suggestions without immediate dismissal, a slightly less rigid adherence to protocol when practical alternatives presented themselves, and occasionally, the briefest hint of what might almost be called humor in her responses to his characteristic quips. What they did not do, however, was discuss the conversation that had taken place in the observation deck. Raynor's declaration hung between them, acknowledged but unaddressed, as they focused on their respective duties. He didn't press the issue, sensing that Muriel needed time to process what had happened, to reconcile whatever she might be feeling with the Tarian principles that had guided her entire life. 1 week after Zarin's departure, Raynor found himself once again in the rarely used observation deck, seeking a moment of quiet after a particularly long shift. The repairs to the damaged docking arm had been complex, requiring him to jury-rig several systems that would need proper replacement when supplies eventually arrived. He stood at the viewport, gazing out at the stars, when the door slid open behind him. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Something in the quality of the silence told him immediately. Muriel, he acknowledged, still facing the viewport. Raynor. She moved to stand beside him, her gaze also directed outward at the starscape. Laura informed me I might find you here. Did she now? Raynor smiled slightly. Our helpful AI seems to have taken a particular interest in our movements lately. I have noticed this as well, Muriel agreed. She appears to be facilitating our interactions. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. The vastness of space spread before them. Finally, Raynor turned to face her. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss? He asked gently. Or did you just come for the view? Muriel met his gaze directly, her iridescent eyes reflecting the starlight. I have been processing our previous conversation, the one that was interrupted. Raynor's heart rate quickened, but he kept his expression calm. I remember. I still have no protocol for this situation, she admitted. But I have been conducting an internal analysis of my responses to your presence, your words, your declaration. And what conclusion did you reach? Raynor asked, barely breathing. Inconclusive, she replied, which might have been disappointing if not for what followed. But there are indicators that suggest a statistical anomaly in my usual response patterns when you are involved. Rayner couldn't help but smile. Is that Tarian for I might have feelings for you too? A subtle shift occurred in Muriel's expression. Not quite a smile by human standards, but a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of her usually perfect posture. It is an acknowledgement that something unprecedented is occurring, she replied carefully, and that I am not opposed to exploring its parameters. For Muriel, Rayner realized this was practically a passionate declaration. His smile widened, warmth spreading through his chest. Well, that's a start, he said softly. And for what it's worth, I'm not opposed to exploring parameters either. At whatever pace works for you. Muriel nodded, a gesture that somehow conveyed more meaning than words could have expressed. There are complications, she added after a moment. Sergeant Zarin's evaluation continues. My duty to the Tarian security forces remains my primary obligation. I understand that, Rayner assured her. I'm not asking you to abandon your principles or your duties. I want to see where this goes. Whatever this is, as do I, Muriel admitted, and the simple statement held such weight coming from her that Rayner felt momentarily speechless. Before he could formulate a response, the station's comm system activated. Engineer Cole and Officer Muriel, Laura's voice announced, your presence is requested in the conference room. The Proximan delegation wishes to express their gratitude prior to departure. Rayner sighed, the moment once again interrupted by duty. We should go. Yes, Muriel agreed, but she made no immediate move toward the door. Instead, in a gesture that took Rayner completely by surprise, she reached out and briefly touched his shoulder, a light contact that lasted only seconds but conveyed volumes. We will continue this discussion, she stated, her tone making it a promise rather than a mere possibility. I'd like that, Rayner replied, unable to keep the smile from his face as they finally turned to leave the observation deck. As they walked through the corridors of Andorra 9, something had shifted between them, a new understanding, unspoken but tangible. They moved in sync, no longer merely colleagues thrown together by circumstance, but something more, something with potential. They were nearly at the conference room when Arya appeared around a corner, her expression brightening at the sight of them. There you are, she exclaimed. I've been looking everywhere. The Proximans are about to leave, and apparently they're insisting on thanking their heroes personally. Her gaze darted between them, a knowing smile spreading across her face as she noted their proximity to each other. Did I interrupt something? She asked innocently. Nothing that cannot be resumed later, Muriel replied before Rayner could speak, surprising both humans with her directness. Arya's eyebrows shot up, but she had the good sense not to comment further. Well then, she said, gesturing toward the conference room. After you, heroes of Andorra 9. As they entered the room to receive the formal thanks of the Proximan delegation, Rayner couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in the short time since Muriel had arrived on the station. What had begun as an awkward encounter in a creaking corridor had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a connection that bridged different worlds, different philosophies, different ways of being. The diplomatic formalities passed in a blur of speeches and expressions of gratitude. Rayner nodded and smiled at the appropriate moments, but his awareness remained fixed on the Tarian officer standing beside him, her presence a steady anchor in the swirl of activity. When the ceremony concluded and the Proximan delegation departed for their vessel, Commander Lin approached them with a satisfied expression. Well done, both of you, she said, her tone genuinely appreciative. Your actions not only saved the station, but secured a favorable trade agreement. The Proximans were so impressed by our handling of the situation that they've agreed to all our primary terms. Just doing our jobs, Commander, Rayner replied with his characteristic modesty. Indeed, Lin nodded, and doing them exceptionally well, especially as a team. She glanced between them, a hint of perceptiveness in her gaze. I've noticed you work together quite effectively. I'll be assigning you to more joint projects in the future. That would be acceptable, Muriel stated, her formal tone at odds with the subtle glance she directed at Raynor. "I thought it might be," Lynn replied with the faintest suggestion of a knowing smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a station to run." As the commander walked away, Raynor turned to Muriel. "More joint projects," he repeated. "I have to say, I like the sound of that." "It is an efficient allocation of resources," Muriel observed, though there was that hint of something almost like humor in her eyes again. "Our complementary skills have proven effective in crisis situations." "Complementary skills, huh?" Raynor grinned. "I'll take that as another compliment." "Factual observation," Muriel corrected, but the tension that had once accompanied such exchanges was gone, replaced by something that, in a human, might have been called teasing. Their exchange was interrupted by Laura's voice over the station's comm system. "Attention, all personnel. Standard operational status has been restored. Regular duty rotations will resume as of next shift. And may I add, congratulations to Officer Muriel and Engineer Cole on their successful defense of the station and their apparently developing interpersonal relationship. Station efficiency projections have increased by 12.3% as a result." A stunned silence fell over the conference room as all remaining personnel turned to stare at them. Raynor felt heat rising to his face, a mixture of embarrassment and amusement flooding through him. "Laura," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Personal observations are not appropriate for station-wide announcements." "I apologize, Engineer Cole," the AI replied, sounding not at all repentant. "I assess the information as relevant to station morale, which has increased by 27% since the announcement." Arya burst into laughter from across the room, giving Raynor a thumbs-up gesture that only intensified his embarrassment. Muriel, remarkably, appeared completely unfazed by the public disclosure. "The AI's assessment of our collaboration's impact on station efficiency is likely accurate," she stated calmly, though the method of delivery was unnecessarily broad. "That's one way of putting it," Raynor muttered, but he couldn't help smiling at her composed response. As the crowd in the conference room began to disperse, many still casting curious glances in their direction, Raynor and Muriel found themselves alone once more. "I should perform a security sweep of the repaired sections," Muriel said, her duty-bound nature reasserting itself. "And I should run diagnostics on the environmental systems," Raynor nodded, understanding the return to professional responsibilities. Yet neither of them moved immediately toward their respective tasks. Instead, they stood in companionable silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. "Perhaps," Muriel suggested finally, "we could meet later in the mess hall for nutritional intake." Raynor grinned, recognizing the invitation for what it was. "Are you asking me to dinner, Officer Muriel?" "I am proposing a practical arrangement for sustenance," she replied. But there was that almost smile again, visible only to someone who had learned to read the subtle variations in her expression. "If you wish to interpret it as a social engagement, that is your prerogative." "I do so wish," Raynor confirmed, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "And I accept your practical arrangement. Say 1900 hours. "Acceptable," Muriel nodded. "Until then, Engineer Cole." "Until then," he echoed, watching as she turned and walked away, her posture perfect as always, but with a new quality to her movement that he couldn't quite define, perhaps a slight easing of the rigid control that had always characterized her bearing. As Raynor headed toward his own duties, he found himself smiling for no particular reason. The station's corridors still creaked, the lights still flickered occasionally, and the coffee machine in the mess hall would undoubtedly still produce something closer to engine oil than any recognizable beverage. But somehow, everything felt different, brighter, filled with possibility. 3 months until Zaren's return and final evaluation. 3 months to explore whatever was developing between them. 3 months that, for the first time since coming to Andorra 9, Raynor found himself looking forward to with genuine anticipation. Later that evening, as they sat across from each other in the mess hall, their conversation flowing more easily than either might have expected, Raynor caught himself studying Muriel's face in the dim station lighting. The luminescent patterns on her skin glowed softly, casting subtle blue highlights across her features. "What are you observing so intently?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "You," he answered honestly. "The way you look in this light. The way you've changed since you first arrived here. Have I changed so noticeably?" There was genuine curiosity in her question. To someone who's been paying attention? Yes. Rayner smiled. "You're still every bit the disciplined Tarian officer you were when you arrived. But there's something else now, too. A willingness to consider alternatives, to adapt beyond the rigid parameters of your training." Muriel considered this assessment, her head tilted slightly in thought. "Perhaps that is not change, but growth," she suggested. "Expansion rather than alteration." "I like that distinction," Raina nodded. "Expansion without losing your essential self." "And you, Rainer Cole?" she countered, surprising him with a personal inquiry. "Have you expanded during our acquaintance?" The question made him pause, considering seriously before responding. "I think I have," he admitted. "I've always approached problems creatively, but working with you has taught me the value of discipline and precision. I'm less inclined to rush in with the first solution that presents itself." "A beneficial development," Muriel observed. "Though I would not wish to diminish the intuitive problem-solving that makes you effective." "We balance each other," Rayner suggested. "Your precision, my improvisation. Your strength, my adaptability." "An effective combination," Muriel agreed, and there was warmth in her voice that had been absent in their earlier interactions. Their conversation continued, moving from professional observations to more personal topics. Rayner sharing stories of his academy days, Muriel offering carefully selected glimpses into Tarian culture beyond the rigid stereotypes. As the mess hall gradually emptied around them, they remained, their connection deepening with each exchanged word, each shared insight. When they finally left, walking together through the quieter night cycle corridors of the station, Rayner felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady development of something genuine between them. At the junction where their paths would separate, his quarters in the engineering section, hers in the security wing, they paused. "I have found this evening illuminating," Muriel said, her formal phrasing at odds with the gentle tone in which it was delivered. "So have I," Rayner replied. "We should do it again sometime. Maybe make it a regular thing." "That would be acceptable," she nodded. Then, with a gesture that seemed both calculated and spontaneous, she reached out and briefly touched his hand, a fleeting contact that, from a Tarian, held profound significance. "Good night, Rainer Cole," she said softly. "Good night, Muriel," he responded, watching as she turned and walked away, her tall figure disappearing around a bend in the corridor. As Rainer continued toward his own quarters, he was startled by Laura's voice from a nearby terminal. "Engineer Cole, may I offer an observation?" "Go ahead, Laura," he sighed, anticipating more AI matchmaking. "Interspecies relationship probability calculations have increased to 78.4% following your dinner engagement," the AI stated matter-of-factly. Additionally, Officer Muriel's biometric readings indicate a 32% increase in endorphin levels during your interaction, consistent with positive emotional responses in Tarian physiology. Despite himself, Rayner smiled at the information. "Laura, has anyone ever told you that you're a bit of a busybody?" "The term has been applied approximately 73 times since my last system upgrade," Laura replied without a hint of concern. "However, my primary function includes monitoring station harmony and personnel well-being. Your developing relationship with Officer Muriel falls within these parameters." "Right," Rayner chuckled. "Well, try to keep the station-wide announcements to a minimum, okay? Some things are better left private." "Noted, Engineer Cole. Though I must inform you that betting pools have already formed among several crew members regarding the timeline of your relationship progression. Engineer Novak has placed a significant wager on before Zaren's return." "Of course she has," Rayner sighed, shaking his head in amused exasperation. "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Engineer Cole. Sleep efficiency is projected to be 27% above your normal parameters tonight." Laura, ceasing commentary now. As the weeks passed, life aboard Andorra 9 settled into a new rhythm. Rayner and Muriel continued their professional collaboration during duty hours, their efficiency together now recognized throughout the station. Off-duty, they spent increasing amounts of time in each other's company, sharing meals, walking the less-traveled corridors of the station, even occasionally watching the stars from the observation deck. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Arya teased Rayner mercilessly, but supported the relationship with genuine enthusiasm. Commander Lin assigned them to more joint projects, clearly approving of their professional synergy, if nothing else. Even some of the Tarian security personnel seemed to accept their commander's unconventional friendship with the human engineer, perhaps recognizing the practical benefits of improved interspecies cooperation. For Rayner, each day brought new discoveries about Muriel, small revelations that painted a portrait of a being far more complex than the stoic Tarian warrior she appeared to be at first glance. He learned that she appreciated the station's ambient sounds, finding the creaking metal reminiscent of Tarian wind instruments. She had a precise aesthetic sense that extended to the arrangement of objects in her quarters. And while she didn't joke in the human fashion, she had developed an appreciation for certain forms of humor, particularly Rayner's more absurdist observations about station life. Muriel, in turn, seemed to find endless fascination in human adaptability and emotional expression. She observed Rayner's interactions with other crew members with keen interest, occasionally asking questions about social nuances that confused her. She began to experiment, cautiously, with more relaxed postures and less formal speech patterns during their private conversations, though she maintained perfect Tarian decorum when others were present. Their physical interactions remained minimal by human standards, an occasional touch of hands, standing closer than strictly necessary, once the brief pressure of her shoulder against his as they watched a particularly stunning stellar phenomenon from the observation deck. But Rayner understood that for Muriel, these small gestures represented significant departures from Tarian norms of physical distance and emotional restraint. 7 weeks after Zaren's departure, a minor crisis provided unexpected insight into how far their relationship had progressed. A malfunction in the station's water recycling system required emergency repairs, forcing Rayner to work through 2 consecutive shifts in the cramped, humid confines of the maintenance tunnels. When he finally emerged, exhausted and drenched in sweat, he was surprised to find Muriel waiting in the engineering bay, a container of what appeared to be actual water, not the synthesized substitute usually available, in her hand. "You require hydration," she stated, offering him the container. "This is purified water from the emergency reserves." Rayner accepted it gratefully, gulping down the cool liquid before addressing her unexpected presence. "Thanks. How'd you know I'd be finishing now?" "I monitored your progress through Laura," Muriel explained. "When completion parameters approached 97%, I retrieved the water and came here." The simple act of thoughtfulness, so practical in its execution, yet so clearly motivated by personal concern, touched Rayner deeply. "You didn't have to do that." "I am aware," Muriel replied, her tone softening slightly. "It was not duty but choice." In that moment, standing in the grimy engineering bay, still covered in the residue of his repairs, Rayner was struck by how much had changed between them. How a relationship that had begun with mutual wariness had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. "Muriel," he said quietly, setting the water container aside, "I need to tell you something." Her expression shifted subtly, a flicker of what might have been concern crossing her features. "Proceed. I know we've been taking things slowly, figuring out what this is between us," he began, suddenly finding it difficult to organize his thoughts into words. "And I've been trying to respect Tarian customs and your comfort level. But the thing is, the more time we spend together, the more certain I become about how I feel." Muriel remained silent, her steady gaze encouraging him to continue. "I'm in love with you," he said simply, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable as they left his lips. "Not just attracted, not just interested, but genuinely in love. With your mind, your principles, your unique perspective on everything. With the way you're constantly balancing duty and personal growth. With all of you." The declaration hung in the air between them, weightier somehow than his first confession in the observation deck weeks earlier. This wasn't a tentative admission of feelings, but a certainty that had grown through shared experiences and deepening understanding. And once again, Muriel went completely silent. But this time, her silence held a different quality. Rather than the shocked stillness of their first encounter, there was a thoughtful intensity to her quietude, as if she were processing his words not as an alien concept, but as something that required careful consideration. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Raynor had ever heard it. "Love," she said, as if testing the word. "Terrians do not use this term. We speak of loyalty, respect, compatibility. But these concepts seem insufficient to describe what I have experienced since knowing you." She took a step closer, diminishing the space between them in a way that felt profoundly significant. "I cannot claim to understand love as humans do," she continued. "But I know that when you are in danger, my primary concern becomes your safety. When you achieve success, I experience satisfaction disproportionate to the objective value of your accomplishment. When you are absent, I find myself calculating the time until our next interaction." Raynor felt his heart racing, understanding that this was Muriel's way of expressing something for which her culture had not prepared her. "If these responses constitute what humans call love," she concluded, her iridescent eyes meeting his directly, "then I must acknowledge that I too experience this state." Joy surged through Raynor, bright and overwhelming. Without thinking, acting purely on emotion, he reached out and gently took her hand in his. To his amazement, Muriel did not pull away. Instead, she looked down at their joined hands with an expression of curiosity and wonder, as if discovering something both strange and precious. "Is this acceptable?" he asked softly, suddenly aware that he might be pushing boundaries. "It is pleasant," she replied, her fingers curling slightly around his. "Different from Terrian contact, which is primarily functional. This serves no practical purpose, yet it creates a sensation of connection." "That's exactly what it's meant to do," Raynor smiled, hardly daring to breathe, lest the moment shatter. They stood that way for several heartbeats, hands linked, the simple contact bridging worlds of difference between them. Then, with a sureness that suggested she had considered this action carefully, Muriel raised her free hand and lightly touched Raynor's face, her fingers tracing a gentle path from temple to jaw. Terrians believe that to know another's essence, one must see beyond physical appearance, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. This gesture is rare, reserved for those with whom one shares profound understanding. Raynor remained perfectly still under her touch, recognizing the cultural significance of what was happening. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to find words adequate to express what her gesture meant to him. The moment was interrupted by the engineering bay doors sliding open as Arya entered, then stopped abruptly at the sight of them. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she apologized, already backing toward the door. "I just came to check if the water system was back online." "It is functional at 98.7% capacity," Muriel informed her, smoothly withdrawing her hand from Raynor's face though, he noted with quiet joy, not releasing his other hand. "Engineer Cole has completed the necessary repairs." "Great," Arya nodded, her gaze darting between them with poorly concealed curiosity. "I'll just let Commander Lin know. Carry on with whatever you were discussing." As she departed, a knowing grin spread across her face, leaving little doubt that the rumor mill would soon be working overtime. Once alone again, Raynor squeezed Muriel's hand gently. "I guess we're not keeping this private anymore." Privacy was unlikely given Laura's monitoring protocols and the station's limited size, Muriel pointed out pragmatically. "Does public awareness concern you?" "Not at all," Raynor assured her. "I just wasn't sure how you'd feel about it, especially with Zaren's evaluation looming." At the mention of the sergeant, a shadow passed briefly across Muriel's features. "Zaren's return is in 5 weeks, 2 days," she acknowledged. "His evaluation may result in multiple outcomes." "Are you worried?" Raynor asked, sensing the uncertainty beneath her composed exterior. Concern is unproductive, she replied automatically. Then, after a moment's hesitation, added, but yes, I am uncertain about the consequences of my choices. The admission of vulnerability touched Raynor deeply. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, he promised. And for what it's worth, I think Zarin will have a hard time arguing with results. You've been the most effective security officer this station has ever had, precisely because you've adapted to working with us humans. Perhaps, Muriel conceded, but Tarian evaluation criteria are not always aligned with practical outcomes. Then we'll just have to make sure the practical outcomes are so overwhelmingly positive that even Zarin can't ignore them, Raynor declared with characteristic optimism. A hint of what might almost be called a smile touched Muriel's lips. Your confidence is both illogical and reassuring. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, Raynor grinned, and was rewarded with a subtle softening of Muriel's expression that, to his trained eye, was the equivalent of laughter. As they left the engineering bay together, still hand in hand, Raynor was struck by the sheer improbability of their journey, from awkward first meeting to this moment of acknowledged connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever Zarin's eventual judgment might be, he couldn't bring himself to regret a single step of the path that had brought them here. The final weeks before Zarin's scheduled return passed all too quickly. Raynor and Muriel settled into a relationship that defied easy categorization. Neither fully human nor Tarian in its expressions, but something uniquely their own. They continued to excel in their professional collaborations, their different approaches complementing each other in ways that benefited the entire station. Off-duty, they explored the boundaries of their connection with careful deliberation, each new shared experience deepening their understanding of one another. 3 days before Zarin's expected arrival, they stood together in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars that had witnessed their first meaningful conversation. Muriel's hand rested comfortably in Raynor's, a gesture that had become natural between them. I've been considering potential outcomes, Muriel said after a period of companionable silence. If Zarin orders my transfer back to Teria Prime, then I'll request a transfer too, Raynor stated without hesitation. There are plenty of stations that could use a miracle worker engineer. Muriel turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. You would leave Endora 9? Your position? Your colleagues? In a heartbeat, he confirmed. This place was just a job before you arrived. Now it matters because you're here. Something flickered in Muriel's eyes. Emotion too complex for simple naming. Tarians do not typically inspire such loyalty outside our own kind. Well, I'm not typical, Raynor smiled. And neither are you, whatever Zarin might think. Muriel's gaze returned to the stars, her profile outlined against the void beyond. If we were to leave together, she said carefully, it would constitute a significant departure from Tarian tradition. No member of my species has ever formed a permanent bond with a human. The implications of her words sent a surge of emotion through Raynor. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I am acknowledging possibilities, Muriel replied, her tone measured but with an underlying current of certainty. Whatever Zarin's decision, my own has been made. Our paths are now linked, Raynor Cole. My future includes you. It was the closest thing to a declaration of commitment that Tarian culture permitted, and Raynor understood its weight. Without words, he raised their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers, a human gesture of reverence and promise. Mine includes you too, he said simply. Whatever comes next. As they stood together at the threshold of an unknown future, the vastness of space spread before them, infinite in its possibilities. The creaking corridors of Endora 9 might not be their home forever, but they had found in each other something far more permanent, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species and culture, as enduring as the stars themselves. And when Zarin's vessel finally appeared on the station's sensors 3 days later, they faced its arrival not with fear, but with quiet resolve, secure in the knowledge that whatever judgment it brought, they would meet it together. The Tarian cruiser docked with its characteristic precision, and Sergeant Zarin strode onto the station with the same imposing presence as before. The formal reception in the operations center had an air of tension that even Commander Lin's diplomatic skills couldn't entirely dispel. As Zarin reviewed the security reports from the past 3 months, his expression remained impassive, giving no hint of his conclusions. Muriel stood at perfect attention throughout the process, every inch the model Tarian officer, while Raynor watched from a respectful distance, their personal connection temporarily set aside in deference to protocol. Officer Muriel, Zarin finally addressed her directly. Your performance metrics are unexpected. Sir, Muriel responded, her tone neutral. Security incident response efficiency has increased by 42% under your command, Zarin stated, consulting his datapad. Diplomatic incident prevention has improved by 37%. These results exceed typical parameters for a station of this classification. Thank you, Sergeant, Muriel acknowledged, careful not to show any reaction to what appeared to be praise. However, Zarin continued, his tone hardening slightly. I also note numerous protocol deviations, unconventional tactical approaches, integration of non-Tarian methodologies, and his gaze shifted briefly to Raynor, unusually close collaboration with station personnel. The moment had arrived. Raynor tensed, preparing for the worst, but Muriel's posture remained perfectly composed as she responded. Sergeant Zarin, with respect, those varied deviations are what enabled the improved metrics, she stated clearly. Adaptation to local conditions has enhanced, not compromised, mission effectiveness. So you argue, Zarin acknowledged, setting D.